Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Patty Brennan Show. Whether you have $20 or $20 million, this show is for those of you who want to protect, grow, and use your assets to live your very best lives. Okay, everybody, I have to confess. We've been doing a lot of podcasts this week. This is the one podcast I am most excited about. The reason is joining us today is Father Robert Sirico. He has written a book called The Economics of the Parables. And I have to tell you all that I literally couldn't put this book down. Yes, I am kind of nerding out on all of you, but I found this book to be so enlightening and so encouraging. And what's wild about it is what Father has done is he's taken these things called the parables, which, as we all know, are basically the stories that Jesus told 2,000 years ago. And what he writes in the introduction, and I'm going to read some of this to you just to tell you how amazing this book is. What he writes in the intro is that for these stories to demonstrate resiliency over 2,000 years is really an amazing, I don't know what the word is. It's just really pretty amazing to me. And what he writes is one of the reasons the parables remain so compelling is that there are certain fundamental truths about the economic dimension of life that remain unchanged, even given the changes in technology, demographics, etc. I mean, think about it, guys. The richest people in Babylon, richest people in Jerusalem, didn't have a fraction of the standard of living that you and I enjoy today. And yet these parables, especially as they are explained by Father, still resonate with all of us. So without further delay, because I really want you to hear from Father Sirico and not me, let me officially welcome Father Robert Sirico. Thank you so much for joining our show.
Patty, you have embarrassed me with your flattery. Thank you so much. I'm glad you're enjoying the book.
Well, you know what? I'm on video. What you don't see that the viewers can see is I have written and highlighted all throughout this book. I've got stars. I've got even one of the things in one of the parables. I actually wrote the words ha ha because you made a joke and I thought it was hilarious. So I think it was so well written. And by the way, when we get off, I will tell you what that line was because, again, I just found it to be so relatable. What I think for everybody who is watching, everyone who is listening, you might be wondering, so what is Patty Brennan doing? You know, having a podcast with a Catholic priest. What I found in the book and what Father actually wrote in the introduction is this cuts across everyone, all lives, all religions, because it's really about living our best lives and what these stories were intended to teach us. And what Father has pulled out of these stories is the economic dimension and how, for example, I am not a Bible reader. I'm just going to come clean, especially since I've got a Catholic priest on the podcast here. So I don't really read the Bible, and I don't necessarily understand the way things are phrased in the Bible. And so when I was reading this book and reading the interpretation of the stories, I got so much more out of it. And I learned, for example, I kind of thought, and Father, maybe you can comment on this, but I kind of thought that when you think about Jesus and you think about the Bible, it's really kind of a closeted scripture on socialism, that we should treat everybody equally, the same. And yet, actually, when I was reading it and reading your commentary, that's not necessarily the case. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, of course, we don't want to treat everybody the same because what we have to do is love everybody. And some people require more love than others or require more love at one time than at other times. So, of course, we don't. We have to treat and recognize the uniqueness of every person. And the uniqueness of every person tells us that people are not equal in the sense that they're not the same. We have to regard their dignity equally, but that's different than the outcomes, and that's different than the money. I mean, the reason economics plays a backdrop to the parables of Jesus is because Jesus is talking about human life. And economics is simply human action. It's human beings evaluating the relative value of the thing that's in front of them. How is this going to work for my family? What does my family need? What do I need at this moment? And then the other side of it is how rare, how scarce is this? And that's really what economics is. It's how we use scarce resources. That includes our time as well. So all of this plays a part of what Jesus is doing and why those parables are so enduring.
It's really powerful because in another statement you said, wealth is not given, it must be created. And there are more successful and less successful ways of achieving that. And what's happened over these 2,000 years is that there's just been more and more wealth created. And so,
Right.
to your prior point in the book, one of the parables is about the talents. And I thought it was so fascinating how you recognized the differences in the three servants. So it's this one, and not to, take away from your book, but it's basically what I got from it was you've got this master and he's got these three servants and he's giving them talents, which is what I read to be money or something of that
Right.
nature, right?
A talent was a monetary unit in the ancient world. We only derive the word talent today from that use of the word. So the Bible's informed our language as well.
And so, to your point earlier about this is not about socialism, in that parable, the master didn't give all three servants the same amount of talent. He gave
No.
one servant 5, another servant 2, and the third servant 1, recognizing
Right.
that each one has their own degree of talent, if you will, and they were to go off and do with those talents what they could.
At the beginning of the parable, it describes the master as entrusting these talents with these three men, each according to their ability, which tells you that their abilities were diverse. He wasn't interested in the ultimate, how much did you make for me, but how faithful are you going to be to what you've been entrusted with according to what you can do. And so there's the master dealing very uniquely with each one of these unique men.
And why don't you just, since we're on this particular parable, why don't you kind of give us the punchline? What do we learn from this particular parable?
What we learn from the parable is, well, of course, the first two double what the masters entrusted them with. However they double it, they double it. The third one is the instructive one. He's the one who, by the way, doesn't diminish the one talent that he's been given. He doesn't lose it. He doesn't squander it. He hides it. And when the master comes, he gives him back the one talent that he's been entrusted with. But here's the really revealing part of this. It's the perception on the part of that servant as to who his master was. He says to the master, I knew that you were a hard man, that different translations translate it differently. You were a hard man, exacting man, gathering where you have not scattered. Gathering where you have not scattered. In other words, you're reaping a harvest from something you didn't plant. So what he says, first of all, is he assumes that the master is hard and that he's an exploiter, that he doesn't get things from an investment. He gathers from where he has not scattered, where he's not planted. And so he says, I was fearful, so I hid your talent. So these two characteristics of the man, misrepresenting, misperceiving the master, and fear. Fear is what paralyzes people in a market. In a market, entrepreneurs have to be, they have to believe in their product. They have to believe in their talents. And this is the history of business, right? I mean, people will hawk their houses. They'll borrow from their their parents and grandparents and friends and put money on their credit card because they have an idea that they are sure is going to work. And this man represents the opposite of that. He accuses the master in the same way, really, that the system of socialism, Marxism, says that entrepreneurs, capitalists, if you will, are exploiters. And that's exactly the mentality of this servant who is unproductive. And he gets his comeuppance for it at the end.
All of what you just said is so fascinating and resonates with me. You know, for whatever it's worth, here I am, a former ICU nurse. It's so odd in a way when I think about it. And Ed and I did hawk our home. We did run up credit cards. I've told that story in prior podcasts. And we were scared. We were scared. I was scared. I hoped and I prayed and I thought, okay, I'm going to work my tail off until I figure this out. And here we are today. And so I think it's just so interesting to me how 2,000 years ago, once again, the story was told and it still applies today.
Right.
The other one that I thought was really neat is the one on stewardship, lessons in stewardship. And, you know, you're in a trust business, I'm in a trust business. And you wrote trust, the basis of faithfulness, is the glue of all positive relationships, including commercial life. It's the trust that others will carry out their end of the bargain. And, you know, you go on to talk about the faithful steward in Matthew and Luke, fulfills the trust of his benefactor. And he went out and he was a good steward, even though, and I thought this was pretty cool, even though he doesn't know the date when his master is going to return. So the steward feels a sense of responsibility, whether he is being observed or not. And I think
Right.
that's powerful to me because, you know, there's a saying in business, you know, you get what you inspect and what you inspect gets improved. And I do agree with that to a certain extent. And at the same point, I don't care who's looking, I'm still going to do this stuff. Does that make sense?
Right. Isn't that exactly the lesson we want to instill in every child, right? In their formation is that your moral responsibilities do not depend on whether you're being observed or not, but on the truth of those responsibilities. And you have to, the man of integrity, somebody once said, is the person who acts the same whether he's being observed or not. And this applies in grand form to people who are granted responsibilities, especially managers of companies, or let's say it's just the manager of your McDonald's. You own the McDonald's, but you hire a manager to run it. If your manager doesn't take the responsibility to lock up on time or open on time or have the quality goods that are fresh and serves with a smile, that kind of thing, your business is going to go down. It doesn't matter how much you've invested in it. The manager has a responsibility and has to have this sense of ownership. That's what stewardship is. It's ownership in place of the owner. And that's what we all are, because we've all been entrusted with things that we have to do. If we don't have that moral core to our enterprise, then our enterprise is going to fail.
And I love the way that you apply that even to big businesses, major corporations, publicly listed companies. That to me
Right.
was a perspective that I had never heard before. And it is so true. The CEO of these publicly traded companies are stewards of shareholder capital. And they have a responsibility to the shareholders to manage that company, deliver the products, the service in a timely manner so that the end consumer, the customer, is well served.
Yes. And the investor,
Right.
the people who trusted their life savings to you.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's interesting, as much as, you know, people in the industry want to kind of complain about the regulatory process, and I will say that some aspects of regulation are burdensome, they're probably overkill, et cetera. At the same point, there's a reason that they're there, and it is to protect that shareholder capital and to make sure that these leaders in these companies are good stewards of shareholder wealth.
Exactly, and all those regulations would be less necessary if people had a greater moral sense, a greater sense of ownership of what they're being entrusted to do. Because if they're, that's why many corporations will try and have their managers invested in the company, so
Mhm.
that the success of the company becomes their own success. But it'd be great if people just had that moral responsibility on their own.
That is really a good point because a lot of those companies do actually require that those managers have a certain percentage of their net worth in that same company.
Right.
Um, Fascinating. Even there, before the Enron issue, way back when, even it used to be that 401k matching contributions could be in that employer's stock. And so when employees got their 401k matches, it was in Enron stock. The problem was, and it was a good idea because every employee was again a shareholder and they had ownership in that corporation. The problem is, while they had ownership, they were not empowered. They didn't have control. And the people that did obviously engaged in fraud. So
Right.
it is very, and what bums me out, to use a technical word, is that those lessons and those things do tend to repeat themselves. We're just coming off of FTX and what is happening to so many people who trusted their assets with that, brokerage firm, and they've lost everything because their money was being taken out of accounts and put somewhere else, never to be seen again. And
Right.
it is kind of interesting. That's, again, why I think your book is so powerful because you're reminding us of these lessons that were, these stories that were told 2,000 years ago, and they still apply today. Stewardship, right? And, commerce. I think in another one of the parables you talk about, in the hidden treasure, just this idea of market exchanges and valuations. If I'm going to the food store to buy a gallon of milk, I value that milk more than I do the money that I'm paying for it. It's just commerce, right? And it's really about valuation and it's about making sure that things are mutually beneficial because that company, whoever it is, whether it's the food store or the underlying manufacturer, for them to be good stewards, they have to retain a profit so that they could continue to pay their employees and continue to produce milk for other people. And just the way that you frame things here in the book just really, it makes it so simple, which is what I think that was intended when they were told 2,000 years ago.
Yes, of course, because Jesus wasn't an economist. He wasn't looking at this thing in what we call today an economic frame of reference. What he was an expert in was humanity. So he knew the human heart. He knew how humans interact with one another. And of course, that's what economics is. I want to emphasize that again because a lot of people think economics is just equations and studies in abstractions. It's fundamentally concrete. The illustration you used about the milk, I prefer to have the gallon of milk than the money it costs to buy it because I can't feed my baby the money. I have to feed the baby the milk. And Jesus knew this about human life and understood that there was an economic dimension to it, even if you can call it economics at the time.
It's so fascinating because, again, economics, to your point, a lot of people think it's all about the math, it's all about the formulas. It's really the study of what people do. Macro
Right.
is big governments on a big picture level. Micro is what you and I do on a day-to-day basis and pulling all of that information together to see what trends are occurring. Are we headed for a recession? Are we not? What's going to happen, in the future, et cetera? And nobody really knows. I often tell people, especially when it comes to their day-to-day thoughts or worries about their money, their portfolio. They kind of get surprised when I say this, but you probably know this also, Father. There is very little correlation between the economy and markets. A lot of people think they are, one and the same. They are not. This year, here we are in January of 2023, is a perfect example of that. Everybody is expecting that we're going to be in a recession during the summer, and yet the market's going nuts. And so it is the study of human behavior. And for example, to take that one step further, a recession is when we all get afraid. We're all pulling back. We are a consumer-based economy, and we're worried, and therefore we're not going to spend our money. And as a result, there's a domino effect that can occur and results in a recession. Doesn't have anything
Yeah.
to do with the market per se. The market's a leading indicator. It's trying to guess what's going to happen in the economy. And so what I've learned from your book is that, again, valuations, how we look at things. Here's a question just off the top of my head. If
Sure.
if you were to look, and I can't remember how many parables there are in your book, but if I were to
13.
ask 13 parables, fantastic. Thank you for that. If I would, and by the way, as a sidebar, I've read 10 of them. I'm kind of skipping around. What I've enjoyed is one night I'll just take one of them, take half an hour, read your passage, and then I go on. What I haven't
Right.
done is to read your afterword, which I'm fascinated. Once I get through everything, I'll be really interested to hear and read what you have to say when it's all said and done.
The afterward is a broader look at the New Testament as a whole and the factors of wealth and profit and poverty and all of that in a broader sense than just the parables.
I'm just kind of curious. This is a different question that I was just about to ask, but how did
Go
you
ahead.
get involved in this? What was it that made you think about the economic dimension of the parables?
Well, the work I've done with the Acton Institute, which I founded in 1990, um, brought me into the whole world of economy. I try and help people think about the transcendent dimension and the physical, earthly dimension of life. But as a priest, uh, obviously I preach on the parables regularly, and that economic part of my knowledge, uh, I would apply, or I'd see at least, in the parables. And I've been really thinking about this book for many years, but just never had the time to sit down and put it all together until COVID came. And then I did. I just kind of began fleshing out all my homily notes and commentaries that I had on it. And that's how this book was born.
It's amazing, and I probably should have and introduced you by saying you've written several other books, and the thing that you said to me before we actually got on live was that this one really spoke to you. This one just kind of flowed. Do I have that right? Although I will tell you, writing a book, there's not a lot of flowing that typically goes on. Because it's hard to do that, and it's hard to get it all in. You've done it so nicely and succinctly. The actual reading is about 175 pages. It's just a really easy read, packed with lots of lessons. So,
Right. Well, this story,
yeah, go ahead.
and that's it's so easy. And the stories, as you say, you can pick them up independently from one another because it's not like there's a cliffhanger at the end of each chapter.
Mhm.
And it is an easy read. And I have to say, it was tough. It's always tough to sit down and just put yourself in front of the computer and write. But I found it a very edifying experience. I felt enriched being able to spend time with the scriptures and all of the wonderful commentary that's in it. If you look at it, it spans a lot of different sources that I'm drawing from as well.
Mhm. Oh yeah, that's your references and your footnotes are, 10 pages long as well. So I appreciate that you give as much credit to those that have taught you um,
Oh, sure.
to pull this wisdom together. So if I were to ask you, Father, Of all of those 13 parables, do you have a favorite? And if so, which one would it be and why?
I do have a favorite. Of course, it's always a dangerous question. It's like asking a dad, who's your favorite kid? Uh, the one that touches me deeply is the shortest one. I think it's less. It's a sentence. It's the pearl of great price. It's called. I think everybody knows the story of the man who comes. It takes place in a market. The man is looking and sees this pearl that's being sold, and he goes back and sells everything he has in order to buy that pearl of great price. And I, I think there are two reasons. The reason it touches me personally is because in my own life, I had to make a decision at some point about redirecting my life. And the thing that did it was that I found something of greater value than I'd ever had. Of course, that's my vocation as a priest. But what intrigues me about this from an economic point of view is that it requires knowledge of pearls on the part of the man who sees the value in the pearl.
Hmm.
Not manufactured as they are today. In the ancient world, they were discovered in nature. But this takes place in a market. And, the other thing about it is that a pearl is a luxury good. Isn't it interesting that Jesus is using a luxury good to teach us about heaven? People decry luxury goods and say, well, they're worthless, they're superfluous. I mean, what can you do with a pearl? And yet Jesus the king of God is like a pearl. There's a story I include in the book. To impress Mark Antony, Cleopatra took a very valuable pearl, which was worth, I think, millions in that time, and dropped it in a glass of vinegar, and it dissolved it. And then she drank the vinegar.
I
Just
read
to
that
impress.
story. I had to read it twice. I'm like, ew. But,
Yeah,
it's
no,
Cleopatra.
there's the ooh factor, but there's also the extravagance of it.
Mm.
That she wants to show him what she can control, what she can do. And my purpose in including that was to underscore that it was a luxury good that Jesus is employing. And I found one day, I mean, it really wasn't one day, it was a whole process for me, that the most important thing in my life was something that I would surrender everything for. Somebody once said that if you don't have anything in your life you're worth dying for, then you really have nothing to live for.
Mm.
And I think on a smaller level, that's the market, valuing things in the market and being able to recognize that this guy knew the market in pearls well enough to know that this was of great value to him.
It's fascinating, and I love that story also. I don't know as many people that would give up everything for their vocation as you have. It takes great sacrifice. We're all here to do something. And what I hope is that whatever I do on a day-to-day basis is what I'm supposed to do, and we continue to improve and add value to another person's life. It's kind of what you said in the beginning, Father. It's all about loving everybody, no matter what, right? I'm reminded of the John Ruskin quote it sits in my desk. And John Ruskin once said, when love and skill come together, expect a masterpiece.
Yeah, it's true. But let me just be honest with you. You describe it as sacrifice, a certain sacrifice. Of course it is. But you're married.
Yes, I have 4 kids too.
Do you think about all the boyfriends you could have married?
Not,
You don't.
no, that's an interesting question.
So, but you sacrificed them all, didn't you?
Mm, yep.
There's, I heard somebody, say once, a preacher. He said, you can have 1,000 options, but only one vocation.
Mm.
And you're willing to surrender all those options, all those potentialities for one reality. And I guess there is sacrifice, but boy, that's not what I think about. I think about what I have.
Mm. True, true, true. You wrote it somewhere
And
else about a bird in the
people,
hand, right?
yes, yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, Father, I can't thank you enough. We could go on and go through each parable, and maybe we'll get you back on and we can go through a few more of them because I just think that every page has something. Again, if you could see my book, it's a mess. But again,
Thank
it really does. You put your heart and soul into it, and it's just, again, a great way to live a life. So thank you
thank you. So
so much, Father.
delighted to be with you, Pat. God bless you and all your listeners.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for taking the time to watch and listen to Father Sirico and I. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. There is such wealth of wisdom in the pages that he has written. I would encourage all of you to go out and get this book. And again, it's just so that you know, when we were talking, I said, Father, how can I help you? What can I do for you? He's like, this is fantastic. Let's just talk about the stories. And I will tell you that I bought a bunch of books. They're all gone. And I'm going to go out and get a whole bunch more because, again, I think there's information here. Whether people are open to it, I think that's, again, one of the parables that you write about. It's that receptiveness. Sometimes, people just have to be ready, and that's totally cool. Whenever they are, that's fine. And so I thank you for your time. I thank all of you for your time. This is a little bit different of a podcast from a financial planner, and I hope you got as much out of it as I did. Father, thank you again for your time as well and for everything that you do for the people that you touch.
Thank you so much.
All righty. If you have any questions, let me know. Because if you have the question, then chances are there's 4,000 other people who are thinking the same thing. So feel free, go to the website, let us know what you think. And most of all, thank you so much for making us a part of your day. I'm Patti Brennan from Key Financial Wealth Management with wisdom and care.